The streets reeked of boiled onions, roasted meats, and something far more mysterious, something sticky, sizzling, and sweet. A child darted between carts, fingers sticky with honey, a grin spread across his soot-smudged face. A dog followed close behind, licking the cobblestones where syrup had dripped. From the alleys came the scent of frying fat, so thick it clung to the back of your throat like smoke. It was not the feast of kings. It was the feast of the poor, the hungry, the bored. It was medieval junk food, greasy, crumbly, bubbling with spice and risk, eaten quickly before the watchman turned the corner or the bread cooled. We think of the Middle Ages as a time of starvation and bland gruel, of meager rations and hard, stale bread. And yes, there was that, but only part of it. Because buried beneath the histories of kings and conquests is the real story of how people satisfied their cravings. Not for nutrition, not for health, but for indulgence. For a taste of joy in an otherwise brutish life. Long before deep-fried Mars bars or flaming hot cheese puffs, peasants and nobles alike yearned for food that excited the tongue. And they had it fried pastries stuffed with fish paste, candied roots that crackled between the teeth, hot pies oozing with sweetened marrow. Many were strange, some were dangerous. All were deeply loved. There's something thrilling, almost scandalous, about the idea of indulgence in the medieval world. After all, this was an age of penance, of religious fear and moral rigidity. That behind church doors and under moonlight, people whispered about fritters and waffles. They risked eternal damnation for roasted chestnuts soaked in honey. And the markets, they were vibrant, chaotic theaters of temptation. Let us wander now not through the halls of royalty or the battlefields of history, but down the crooked lanes of London, Paris, Bruges, and Florence, where vendors hawk their secret recipes, where boiling oil hissed like serpents, and where people licked their fingers and wiped them on their tunics. We'll meet the vendors, the gluttons, the innovators, the spice smugglers, the sugar addicts, the monks with sweet teeth, and the thieves who stole cheese not for hunger, but because it was delicious. And along the way, we'll discover how food became fantasy, how the act of eating turned into a pleasure play, a brief escape from the cold and filth and war. It is a story not told in textbooks. It is told in crumbs. In the 14th century, a baker named Edric was fined in York for making too large a portion of honey fritter for a single penny. What was his sin? He had, according to the authorities, tempted children with excessive delight. Yes, you heard that right, excessive delight. Imagine a world where sweetness itself was suspect, where too much pleasure from food could be seen as morally dangerous, and yet people kept eating. More than that, they got creative, in ways that are bizarre, endearing, and sometimes outright alarming. One woman in Milan was arrested for selling candied beetles as aphrodisiacs. Another in Ghent became wealthy by perfecting a dried apple pie so potent that merchants would travel 3 days for a slice. And then there was the infamous pork-stuffed pear, a dessert so deceptive that priests banned it from convent kitchens. It wasn't a pear at all, but a delicate illusion crafted from meat, shaped, sugared, and dyed until it looked exactly like the fruit of Eden. But perhaps the most infamous tale is that of the spiced chicken dough ball of Avignon, a culinary monstrosity cooked up during a papal festival. Chicken, dates, cinnamon, cloves, and unexpectedly wine-soaked breadcrumbs fried into a lump and rolled in crushed almonds. It was, by all accounts, unforgettable, and possibly poisonous. These were not elite delicacies served on golden plates. These were the foods of carnivals, marketplaces, and roadside stalls. Some were born of necessity, others of madness. All were born of the same desire to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. The roots of junk food stretch back far. Even the term junk is misleading. What we call junk today was, in the Middle Ages, often a luxury. Sugar was imported across deserts. Cinnamon was more valuable than gold. A tiny cake dusted in spice could cost a full day's wages, but the people bought them anyway because the taste was worth it. And let us not forget the drinks. Oh, the drinks. Honeyed ale with floating raisins. Warm milk mixed with egg yolk and nutmeg. Strange red cordials rumored to enhance memory or provoke visions. There was hippocras, a wine mixed with sugar, cinnamon, and ginger, served warm in winter and chilled in summer. It was considered both medicine and magic. There were monks who claimed it prolonged life. There were barmaids who claimed it did the opposite. In one London tavern, a drink called devil's pudding was made from mashed prunes, dark beer, and a raw egg stirred in with a bone spoon. It was said to cure melancholy, or at least knock you out for long enough to forget it. And then, as now, food became identity. Fried cheese balls wrapped in fig leaves were the snack of choice among scholars in Bologna. Young lovers in Toulouse exchanged pine nut tarts as tokens of affection. Pilgrims in Spain carried with them pockets of salted almond brittle, believing it gave courage on the road. And in the dark corners of Paris, candle makers ate fried eels dipped in plum jam. Why? No one knows. They just did. All of this strange and sticky world is the other side of the Middle Ages. It's the world where food wasn't just fuel. It was a joy, a risk, a secret pleasure in a world that offered few. And as we drift through this history, piece by sugary crumb, we'll see that medieval junk food was more than indulgence. It was rebellion against hunger, against rules, against a world that said food must be plain and life must be hard. So lean back, rest your eyes. Let your mind wander through the bustling, stinking, spice-filled markets of a time long gone. We'll travel not by sword, but by spoon. And now, let us begin with the tale of the fried rose petals of Cordoba.
The tale begins, curiously enough, not with sugar or cheese or even meat but with flowers. In Cordoba, during the twilight of Al-Andalus, the scent of roses drifted through the streets. Not from gardens, but from frying pans. In the kitchens of wealthy Moorish households, rose petals were soaked in honey, dipped in a batter made of chickpea flour, then fried to a crisp in olive oil. Served warm and sprinkled with powdered sugar, they melted on the tongue like perfume and smoke. It was said that eating them made the soul lighter, closer to the divine. One 11th century poet wrote that a single bite of fried rose petals could make a man forget his debts. Another claimed they were an aphrodisiac so powerful that monks were forbidden to even smell them, lest temptation creep in through their nostrils. Whether true or not, the petals became a symbol of luxury and longing, the most delicate junk food of an age ruled by both faith and hunger. But not all medieval street treats were so refined. Far to the north, in the shadowy alleys of York, a very different kind of snack took center stage. Blood pudding sticks. Hardened lengths of coagulated pig's blood, mixed with oats, salt, and sometimes a splash of beer. Once cooked and dried, they were easy to carry, chewable like leather, and favored by apprentices and board guards alike. They were not sweet, they were not pleasant, but they filled the stomach, and, for a few pennies, a boy could suck on one through an afternoon of errands. At fairs, you could find vendors slapping them onto grills, adding a drop of vinegar and a pinch of black pepper. The sizzle was unmistakable. Children cheered. Old women complained. But the smell yearned smoke, spice lingered like a shadow. And yet, as strange as blood sticks sound, they were nothing compared to the popular ratna bun of Prague's infamous St. Egidius night market. The name was a joke. It was, in fact, a clever play on a meatless dumpling, a vegetarian dish designed to mimic the forbidden sasaten-like patty shaped like a rat's body, nestled into a slice of crusty bread topped with fermented cabbage and mustard. The recipe came from a group of rogue nuns who had been expelled from their convent for baking unauthorized pies. They wandered the countryside, cooking for travelers and inventing bizarre delights wherever they went. Their motto was simple: if we must suffer, we shall suffer sweetly. By the 14th century, street food had become a paradox. On one hand, it was a necessity sheep, fast, filling. On the other, it was entertainment, an expression. Vendors competed not just in price, but in showmanship. They shouted poems, they flipped pancakes. One man in Paris became famous for juggling hot chestnuts with his bare hands, tossing them into paper cones without dropping a single one. Children followed him. So did rats. And still, they came for chestnuts roasted with rosemary and cloves, for meat pies with hard-boiled eggs hidden inside like treasures, for honey-glazed figs stuffed with cheese, wrapped in bacon, and fried until the world made sense again. In Florence, there was the legend of La Signora del Dolce, an old woman who sold spiced biscuits outside the cathedral. Her back bent, her hands always coated in flour. She never spoke, she never smiled. But her cookies were so addictive, they caused fights among students and priests alike. One bishop tried to buy her recipe for a bag of gold coins. She refused. The next day, her stall was empty. Years later, a rival vendor claimed to have found her bones beneath the cobblestone still, clutching a copper mold. But let's leave behind the bones and move on to something warmer. Porridge. Ah, porridge. The eternal medieval gray, bland, ever-present, but that was only its surface form. Beneath the monkish versions were porridge dishes so decadent they danced on the edge of respectability. In Wales, there was a porridge made with cream, crushed almonds, dried cherries, rosewater, and wine. It was called brief rwydd, and was served in tiny cups at weddings and funerals, sometimes both on the same day. It had the consistency of custard, the taste of cake, and was so rich that nobility often kept it chilled in snow 4 hours before serving. Meanwhile, in the markets of street cooks sold what they called hunter's porridge, a savory blend of barley, garlic, duck fat, and mushrooms, cooked until it formed a thick, chewy slab that could be eaten like a pancake. Hunters and mercenaries loved it. So did drunk students. So did thieves, who could carry a slice under their cloaks for days without it spoiling. But even this was nothing compared to the mysterious midnight confections of the Burgundian court. There are few records of these, only whispers. Mentions in cookbooks bound in velvet. Recipes half scratched out by monks. But what remains suggests they were elaborate, theatrical dishes, sweets served only after the final bell of night. One was a molded sugar swan filled with honey-drenched walnuts. Another was a candied turnip, dyed red, served in a crystal goblet and mistaken for a plum. One noble wrote that eating the midnight confections felt like drinking light. Another claimed they caused dreams of fire and music. Perhaps they were simply high on sugar. Or perhaps the cooks knew something we've forgotten. And yet, while the nobility nibbled on edible swans, the real innovation was happening in the streets. Because street food was a mirror reflecting what people craved, feared, remembered. In Tallinn, children bought candy made of boiled molasses and crushed charcoal, shaped into little skulls. They called them death drops. It was supposed to protect them from plague. In Vienna, you could buy sin buns, sticky rolls made with cinnamon, rum, and poppy seeds, stamped with symbols to remind you that indulgence came at a cost. But did it stop them?
Of course not.
The desire for junk food, the need to taste something purely for joy is older than guilt, older than religion. It is human. And as we drift further, through night markets and castle kitchens, dusty roads and sunlit fairs, we will see this craving take shape in ever more wondrous forms. Now, let us continue deeper into the flavors, the secrets, and the chaos. Let us visit the fish-stick cart of Lübeck, where no fish was ever served.
The fish-stick cart of Lübeck stood at the edge of the harbor, near where the boats from Denmark came in heavy with herring. But this cart sold no herring at all. No cod, no smelt, no fish of any kind. And yet it smelled exactly like fish, salty, tangy, with a hint of brine and vinegar. The secret? Dough made from flour, stale beer, grated horseradish, and a dash of dried seaweed harvested from the Baltic coast. Shaped into rough fillets, fried in lard until the edges curled like real fish skin, then served with a dollop of mustard and pickled onion. To a traveler, it passed for fish. To a drunk sailor, it was better than fish. To the local poor, it was cheap, hot, and filling. People called them ghost fillets. But to the city authorities, it was fraud. In 1389, a vendor named Hiltrude was arrested for peddling deceitful fishes. She argued that no one really believed they were fish. The judges, amused, fined her 2 silver pfennigs and let her go. Within a week, her cart had a line stretching down the dock. But that was Lübeck. In Venice, the stakes were higher. In Venice, spice ruled everything. Cinnamon, nutmeg, saffron and, above all, black pepper. The price of a single pouch could rival that of a gold ring. And the city's back alleys were filled with pepper imposters, crushed berries rolled in soot and oil, dried seeds from foreign weeds passed off as the real thing. In the world of junk food, black pepper wasn't just a flavor, it was currency, a symbol, a weapon. One of the most brazen scams came from a snack known as Le Bricioli dei Diavoli Devil, crumbs. They were simple things, tiny fried bread balls coated in spiced sugar and pepper. Sold by street boys on long skewers, they were crunchy, addictive, and slightly painful to eat. The sweetness masked the fire, but by the 5th crumb your mouth burned. By the 10th, you were sweating. But the catch was this. Many sellers used crushed mustard seed or burned olive pits in place of real pepper, made the snack cheaper, hotter, more dangerous. At least 2 nobles reportedly choked on them. One bishop fainted in the street. Still the people loved them. Pain was part of the pleasure. And pleasure, well, that was always risky. Yet not all junk food was born of deception. Some was born of devotion. Along the Camino de Santiago, the great pilgrim trail across Spain, weary travelers needed food that was portable, potent, and ideally holy. Enter pan de cielo, or bread of heaven. It was a dense, sweet loaf packed with figs, almonds, honey, and clove. Pilgrims carried slices wrapped in cloth, sometimes blessed by monks. Some believed it could cure fatigue. Others used it to bribe their way into crowded monasteries. Legend has it that one particularly moldy piece was mistaken for a relic and enshrined in a chapel for 50 years before anyone noticed. But it wasn't just pilgrims munching on spiritual loaves. In the walled city of Carcassonne, soldiers snacked on powder puffs, chewy bites made from crushed lentils, goose fat, dried herbs, and just enough sugar to confuse the palate. They were gritty, savory, and faintly sweet, designed to last through sieges. They were popular with guards and garrison cooks, but hated by noble women, who called them pig food disguised as pastry. Of course, the noble class had its own tastes. In Burgundy, aristocrats craved sugar meats, tiny kebabs of pork and veal, glazed with cane sugar and lemon. Grilled and served on silver sticks, they were considered fashionable and vaguely erotic, especially when eaten slowly. One countess scandalized her court by consuming 6 during a poetry recital. A poet watching her wrote, "She skewers her meats as if they were hearts." Whether he meant it as praise or warning is unclear. But even the nobility weren't immune to the charm of the truly ridiculous. In the courts of Avignon, there existed an annual competition to create the most outlandish sweetmeat. Bakers would enter with candied mouse sculptures, sugar quills that could actually write, tiny caramelized onions filled with saffron custard. One year, a monk turncook won the prize with a confection he called Night Confession, a roasted chestnut wrapped in salted licorice, coated in rose jelly, and served with a whisper. No one could decide if it was delicious or disgusting, but everyone remembered it. And perhaps that's the essence of medieval junk food. Memory. These weren't just treats. They were experiences, tiny, edible stories told in flavor and texture. Take the goblin cakes of Edinburgh. Sold only during Samhain, these black oat biscuits were laced with anise, dried rowan berries, and ground acorns. They were hard, bitter, and slightly sweet, and said to protect against spirits. Children who ate them before sundown were safe from goblin mischief. Those who didn't, well, that was their problem. Or the Maiden's Tears of Saxony, honey drops infused with thyme and vinegar, said to ease heartbreak. Popular at weddings and funerals alike, they were often passed out by old widows who claimed they knew what sorrow tasted like. And then there was the curious case of the cheese meteors of Bruges, made from whipped curd, garlic, and ash, rolled into balls and baked until they cracked like little meteors. These treats were black on the outside, white on the inside, and wildly pungent. They were considered a joke, food a dare, really passed between rowdy students and flirtatious barmaids, but they caught on. Eventually, even traveling merchants carried them, carefully packed in clay jars to hide the smell. They were a medieval equivalent of today's hot pepper challenge, a test of courage and digestion. And yet, despite all the spectacle, the frying, the sugaring, smoking and molding and stuffing, there was something deeper happening in every bite. For every treat sold in shadowy markets, for every sweet wrapped in linen and tucked into a peasant's pocket, there was a flicker of something vital. Resistance. Resistance against hunger, against fear, against the cold monotony of survival. Junk food was, in its simplest form, joy that could be held in the hand, a taste that said, life can still surprise you. And in that way, perhaps medieval junk food wasn't junk at all. Perhaps it was a form of magic flour and oil and honey, transformed into memory. So we continue, not in haste, but in hunger. Let us walk now through the spice-laden streets of Fez. Let us hear the hiss of sesame oil and the laughter of children with cheeks sticky from date molasses. Let us find the fried fig balls that once caused a market riot. Let us follow the story crumb by crumb till we reach its last bite. Fez, in the heart of medieval Morocco, was a city of contradictions, holy and hedonistic, austere and aromatic. The narrow alleys of its souk pulsed with sound, the clang of copper, the chanting of prayers, and the unmistakable crackle of frying oil. Here, in a market lined with dyed silks and spice mounds as bright as crushed jewels, came the treat that nearly tore the city apart. They were called Krima Eltine fig balls. Simple in appearance. Crushed black figs, mixed with sesame, honey, and a hint of black pepper, rolled into sticky orbs the size of walnuts. Fried until the edges crisped, then dusted with cinnamon and almond flour. Eaten hot, they were glorious. Eaten cold, they were gluey. Sold from carts by boys in patched cloaks, they were cheap, sweet, and fiercely addictive. And one year, during the spring festival of Maulid, a rumor swept the Medina that a certain vendor, an old man named Yusef, had added saffron to his fig balls. Now, saffron then, as now, was precious. It cost more than its weight in gold. It was used in royal kitchens and courtly perfumes. To lace a street snack with saffron was blasphemy, or brilliance. Hundreds flocked to Yusef's stall. Lines formed before dawn. Other vendors accused him of hoarding, of deception. Someone claimed his saffron was fake-dyed marigold petals soaked in vinegar. A fight broke out. Pots were knocked over. A tray of fig balls flew through the air and struck a city guard in the face. He licked his lip, tasted honey and spice, and ordered everyone arrested. The market closed for 3 days. The recipe was banned. But the damage was done. People remembered the flavor. Some said it tasted like love, others like sin. Either way, fig balls became legend. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean, in the chilly corridors of northern nunneries, a quieter revolution was rising. For behind the stone walls and candlelit prayers, nuns were experimenting with sugar. Not just ordinary sugar, mind you, but spun sugar, crystallized herbs, and sweet syrups poured into molds shaped like saints and sinners. Convents were among the few places with both time and tools to refine confections. And some sisters had palates sharper than any court chef. In one abbey near Ghent, a nun known only as Sister Beatrix developed a recipe for candied lavender petals soaked in white wine. She called them heaven's ashes. They were pale, fragrant, and dissolved on the tongue like mist. Monks from nearby monasteries wrote letters begging for samples. One offered to trade his entire collection of illuminated manuscripts. She declined. But not all confections were so pious. In the Abbey of San Gregorio in Pisa, nuns concocted what they termed dolci del pentimento, sweets of repentance. These included caraway toffees, candied chickpeas, and a notorious ginger almond torte rumored to stir unbecoming warmth in the belly. The bishop banned it. The sisters renamed it herbal digestive loaf and continued baking it for another 60 years. Recipes passed through whispered notes and visiting pilgrims. A traveling apothecary once remarked that he found more innovation in the kitchens of cloisters than in the feasting halls of dukes. Perhaps because sin, when suppressed, finds strange ways to rise like sugar in the hands of celibate women. But what of saffron, the most coveted spice of all? By the 15th century, saffron had become more than a flavor. It was a weapon, a bribe, a key to power. And wherever it went, fraud followed. In Bavaria, a merchant named Otto the Bright was executed for selling saffron laced with chalk dust and turmeric. In Bruges, a noblewoman was caught hiding saffron strands in the hems of her gown, smuggling them across borders in exchange for forbidden French cheeses. The smuggling routes grew complex. In the Alpine passes, shepherds posed as spice traders. In Venice, dock workers swallowed saffron in wax capsules to retrieve later under less dignified conditions. In Avignon, saffron was known as the Yellow Devil, both beloved and feared. Why? Because it made everything better. Even the simplest peasant porridge stirred with a few threads of saffron tasted rich. Even a day-old fritter turned golden and aromatic. In street food, saffron was alchemy, turning base ingredients into treasure. And so people risked everything for it. One forgotten cookbook from 1462 describes a snack called uvo del sol, egg of the sun. A boiled egg, wrapped in saffron dough, rolled in crushed coriander seeds, then baked until golden and brittle. It was said to taste like light. But the recipe ends with a warning. Too much, and the mind flies too far. What did they mean hallucination, ecstasy, or simply expense? No one knows. The cookbook's author was later imprisoned for debt. Meanwhile, back in London, the poor were developing their own bright, defiant treats. Enter the vinegar taffy. Made from boiled molasses, a splash of ale vinegar, and a handful of barley flour, this chewy. No, 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 no. Children loved it. Adults called it gut glue. Street vendors would stretch and pull the taffy on iron hooks, putting on a show that drew crowds even in the filthiest corners of the city. A common chant was heard among children. Stretch it wide and pull it thin. Make my tongue forget my skin. Snap it once and chew it slow. Taste the joy the church won't show. That rhyme, scrawled centuries later on a tavern wall, captures something eternal. Junk food in the Middle Ages was not just flavored, it was rebellion. It was poetry. It was a quiet, sticky-fingered act of defiance against a world of sermons, taxes, and war. People fried and chewed and sucked and smeared and crunched their way through hardship. And through each concoction they told a story. I am hungry, yes, but I am still human. I want joy. And for one moment I will have it. Now, come. We have not yet tasted the caramel onions, nor the honey-thyme dumplings of the Carpathian hill monks, nor the forbidden marzipan faces sold in the alleys of Prague. There are hundreds of flavors waiting in the shadows.
And there once existed a guild unlike any other, not of smiths or weavers, not of masons or scribes, but of Cucuernacies formed in secret sometime in the early 1300s. Their charter forbidden from being copied. They were protectors of flavor, guardians of syrup, and defenders of a single principle. No good thing should be shared too freely. They operated from the cellar of a crumbling church. Entry required a code word and a vial of clove oil. Their recipes were passed not on parchment, but carved into wooden tablets soaked in vinegar, then destroyed after each apprentice passed his trial. Members were sworn to silence. Any sweet soul without approval was considered betrayal. One baker poured bold, foolish stride to sell a cinnamon custard pie without the guild's blessing. His shop was burned. His pie, however, became a legend, known as the heretic's tart. It was a mixture of egg, goat's milk, ash, honey, and ground pear, encased in a thick crust sprinkled with dried basil. It didn't look like much, but those who ate it claimed it tasted like music, like dreams they once had and had long forgotten. No one could replicate it. The guild was not pleased. Meanwhile, far from the guarded kitchens and whispering guild halls, another kind of baker was rising, one with less fear and far more fervor. The monks of St. Nestled deep in the snowy woodlands of what is now southern Germany, were known for their prayers, their discipline, and one strange little biscuit that caused the church no small amount of alarm. They were called angel biscuits, and they were baked only on the longest night of winter, made from crushed pine nuts, wildflower honey, dried mint, and a dusting of powdered amanita mushroom. Yes, the red-capped kind of biscuits were small, crumbly, and extraordinarily fragrant. Eaten in silence during the night of watch, the monks believed the biscuits opened their minds to the divine, to light. Two voices, two visions of the afterlife. One abbot claimed he saw an angel walk through the fire. Another said he heard all the sins of the world scream and then fall silent. A third merely wept for 3 hours and never explained why. Eventually, the church investigated. The abbey was fine. The recipe ordered destroyed. But one monk lover stubborn hid it inside a psalter between Psalms 12 and 30. Centuries later, a local historian found the page. It smelled faintly of mint and something else earthy dangerous. Forgotten he did not bake it. But he did write a book, which was immediately banned. And so the recipe passed once more into shadow. But perhaps the most bittersweet tale comes not from monks or guilds, but from a woman named Eli. She lived in Prague. No one knows her last name. No portraits remain, only stories. They say she had a stall just outside the Charles Bridge, where she sold marzipan faces, small molded candies shaped like smiling children, made from almonds, honey, and rose water. They were eerily lifelike. Too lifelike, some said. You could choose from dozens of expressions: laughing, sleeping, frowning, crying. Eliska said she molded them from dreams. People came from across the river to buy them. Lovers gave them as tokens. Parents used them to calm frightened children. But then something strange happened. People began to report effects. A woman who ate a weeping face said she cried uncontrollably for hours. A soldier who ate a laughing one claimed to hear voices. A boy who bit into a sleeping one fell into a trance so deep he had to be shaken awake. The church called it witchcraft. Eliska vanished. But even now, once a year, on the feast of St. John, a small paper note is tacked to a crumbling wall near the bridge. No one sees who puts it there. It simply reads, "They remember their names. Do you?" It is unsigned. But beneath it, some years, a small almond candy rests, always shaped like a sleeping face. Meanwhile, as tales of sweets and mystics spread through the continent, in the Baltic, the poor turned to simpler Craven's birch bark crisps. These were not a joke, nor a punishment. They were a testament to what people can do when they are desperate to taste something different. The bark was soaked in water, scraped thin, dried until brittle, then fried in animal fat and salted with dried fish powder. It snapped like a cracker and tasted like trees. Children sucked on them when their teeth hurt. Old men crumbled them into beer. It was not joy, exactly, but it was texture. And sometimes that was enough. But joy, real joy, could still be found. In Kiju, there was a treat sold by a traveling Roma that defied all categories. Fire bread. No one knows the true name. It was made of fermented wheat, dried cherries, horse milk curds, and something called white smoked salt. The dough was rolled flat, baked directly on coals, then sprinkled with sugar. It was sweet, bitter, chewy, and so fragrant it could be smelled for miles. They said the smoke cured fever, that the bread healed sorrows, that children born the night of fire bread would never stop. It was sold from wagons lit with lanterns, accompanied by music that sounded like storms about to break. People didn't just eat the fire bread, they remembered it in their dreams. And perhaps that is what all of this comes down to. In a world of frostbitten winters, of aching backs and rotting teeth, of hunger and holy men and heavy boots, junk food was memory. It was escape. It was ritual. Not just the taste, but the moment the paper cone, the flickering torchlight, the greasy fingers, and shared laughter. Not all stories were written in ink. Some were written in crumbs, on napkins of old cloth, in sauce stains on wool tunics, in the burning of tongues too eager to wait for things too cool. So, take your time. There is more still to taste. Next, we'll travel to the coasts of the Black Sea, where sailors chewed, and where a pastry war once erupted between two sisters over a stolen nutmeg custard. On the wind-chapped shores of the Black Sea, long before steamboats and lighthouses, sailors relied on more than salt and superstition to keep their minds from unraveling. They relied on salted lemon cake s'more, dense discs of wheat flour, dried lemon peel, goat butter, and salt, baked until almost too hard to bite. They were not sweet in the usual sense. Rather, they sparked the tongue with sharpness and soothed it with richness. They were chewed slowly, often softened with warm wine or spit-polished pebbles in the mouth. Sailors claimed they warded off melancholy. One captain swore that eating one a day prevented both madness and mutiny. They were not sold in markets. They were made in silence by wives and widows before their men departed. Each batch wrapped in waxed cloth, blessed by habit or by hope. Some had initials carved in with dull knives. Others contained slivers of dried herbs bay, thyme, fennel, chosen, based on dreams the night before baking. But just across the sea, in the golden glassed halls of Constantinople, indulgence took another shape entirely. Here, in the heart of Byzantium, sweets were politics, power, seduction. A single custard could make or unmake alliances. And it did. The story begins with two sisters, Avdokia and Zoe. Both were cooks in the service of a high-ranking official. Both brilliant, both ambitious, and both vying for control of the court's dessert table. Avdokia's specialty was a custard known as cardamonoglyco, or warm, soft pudding made with almond milk, nutmeg, and a touch of ground sesame. It was rich, comforting, rumored to cure insomnia and provoke confessions. Zoe, not to be outdone, crafted her own version, infused with saffron, layered with paper-thin rose petals, and crowned with a glaze of pomegranate syrup. One autumn evening, during a feast honoring a visiting prince, both sisters presented their creations. The prince died full of lamb and bored of dancing tasted Avdokia's custard first. He closed his eyes, sighed, then tasted Zoe's. He opened his eyes, smiled. He asked for a third. Help it. Not of Avdokia's. The next day, Zoe was promoted. Avdokia was dismissed. But she did not disappear. Instead, she opened a bakery just outside the southern gate. She made only one thing, a custard, sold in small clay cups, served warm by candlelight. The poor couldn't afford it. The rich weren't supposed to eat it. But still they came slipping past guards, veiled and hooded, whispering her name. Zoe, furious, petitioned for the shop's closure. The church labeled the desert distracting to the soul. Evidokia renamed it Greek for the revealer. And still they came. Eventually, the recipe was banned. The bakery shuttered. But the custard survived, scribbled in the margins of cookbooks, smuggled by pilgrims, kept alive in whispers. Some say it's still made today, in kitchens where the lights is low and the air smells of cardamom and resistance. And while some recipes were guarded like gold, others were stolen openly. Consider the pastry feud of Noto in southern Sicily. It began with a stolen recipe for nocciola cream, a hazelnut custard baked inside an olive oil crust and topped with sea, salt, and thyme. The original baker, a woman named Rosetta, shared it once with her sister, Agata, during a winter of hunger and mourning. Years later, Agata opened her own bakery. She served nocciola crema on gold-trimmed plates, claiming it as her own invention. She added orange zest. She quoted scripture. She became famous. Rosetta responded not with lawsuits, but with spiteful sweetness. She created a new pastry, twisted, bitter, irresistible. Dried fig and almond stuffed in layers of flaky dough, brushed with wine and a hint of ash. She called it Sorella Tradita, the betrayed sister. It sold out every day for a decade. Agata responded with Il Perdano, a soft sugar loaf shaped like a heart, filled with cream and rose water. Customers had to choose. Some bought both. Many chose sides. The feud outlived them both. Their granddaughters, decades later, opened the cafe together. They served both pastries on a single plate. The reconciliation, but even then, the flavors seemed to glare at one another. And thus, food became feud. Feud became folklore, and all from sugar and flour. Across Europe, similar legends bubbled up like boiling jam. In Paris, an entire street was once blockaded because of a disagreement over nut tarts. In Bruges, a bakeress apprentice added one too many cloves to a plum cake and was accused of sorcery. In Toledo, a man was excommunicated for baking a cake in the shape of the Virgin Mary, and still the people ate. In kitchens where firewood was scarce and time was short. In alleys where oil hissed and children sang dirty rhymes. In monasteries where monks carved their prayers into loaves of bread. In brothels where candied lemon peels were passed like secret coins. They ate because eating was remembering. Because flavor could transport you farther than pilgrimage, deeper than prayer. And medieval junk food, for all its oddity, was never truly junk. It was memory, hope, rebellion, celebration. So let us walk a little further still to the back alleys of Lisbon, where candied olives turned black and shined like pearls, to the icy towns of Norway, where caramel fishkin crisps were passed between lovers like kisses, to the dusty squares of Antioch, where honeyed almond brittle was shaped into tiny animals and given to children on feast days. So many places, so many stories in crumbs. And next, we shall visit the secret sugar caves of the Pyrenees, the cursed honey toffee of Kent, and the only medieval snack said to taste exactly like heartbreak.